We stood under the glowing lights of the White House portico when my husband grabbed my arm. "Walk 3 paces behind me and do not mention your boring computer job," he hissed. I did not argue. I simply handed the Secret Service agent my digital clearance. The scanner flashed a vibrant green alert. The agent stopped breathing. He stepped back and tapped the shoulder of a highly decorated Three-Star Admiral. The Admiral turned locked eyes with me and snapped a flawless salute. "Colonel, we have been waiting for you," he announced. My husband stared at me in pure horror. "My name is Rebecca, and I am 34 years old. For 7 years, I played the role of the quiet and docile wife to Carter. He was a 36-year-old political public relations consultant who built his entire identity on designer suits and networking events. To him and his wealthy family, I was just a low-level IT worker who stayed home in sweatpants. His mother, Beatrice, constantly reminded me that I lacked the elegance required for their high society circles. I let them believe whatever made them feel superior. I never told them my boring computer job was actually my role as the sole founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber Defense. I also never mentioned I was an active reserve colonel in United States Cyber Command. Keeping my life classified protected my country and gave me the perfect vantage point to observe exactly who my husband truly was. The East Wing security checkpoint was swarming with Washington elites. Carter adjusted his custom tuxedo and looked at my simple navy evening gown with blatant disgust. He handed his gold-embossed invitation to the lead agent and waved his hand vaguely in my direction. "She is my +1, he said loudly, ensuring the people behind us heard him. "Try not to embarrass me tonight, Rebecca." I stepped forward and held up my phone. The agent scanned my encrypted code. The machine immediately triggered a priority alert. The agent straightened his posture and alerted the Admiral. When the Admiral saluted me and called me Colonel, the entire security line fell dead silent. Carter blinked rapidly. His smug smile vanished. "What is going on?" he demanded, looking from the Admiral to me. Before Carter could demand answers, an elite security detail surrounded me. They ushered me through the velvet ropes toward the VIP entrance. Carter attempted to follow me, but a Secret Service agent placed a firm hand on his chest. "General admission must wait in the standard line," the agent stated flatly. As I walked down the historic corridors of the White House, my secure phone began vibrating endlessly. Carter was sending a barrage of furious text messages. "Who did you sleep with to get VIP access? You are humiliating me. Get back here right now." His entitlement was staggering. For years, I had paid our mortgage while he spent his income on country club memberships and luxury cars to impress his clients. I ignored his messages and entered the main ballroom. It was filled with military brass and defense contractors. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water and joined a quiet conversation with 2 4-star generals discussing foreign cyber threats. 10 minutes later, Carter burst into the room. He had undoubtedly used a corrupt political connection to bypass the general admission line. His face was red with anger as he marched directly toward me. He did not care that I was speaking with high-ranking military officials. He grabbed my shoulder tightly and pulled me away from the generals. "What kind of stunt are you pulling?" he whispered angrily. "Go fetch me a drink right now so I can do some real networking with people who actually matter." I looked at the hand gripping my shoulder and then up at his face. I was about to calmly explain the reality of his situation when a woman walked up beside him. She was wearing a completely inappropriate red designer dress and dripping in diamonds. She intimately linked her arm through Carter's right in front of me. "Is this the dowdy little housewife you told me about, Carter?" she sneered. She looked me up and down with obvious disgust. Her name was Camilla. She was a ruthless defense lobbyist, and I knew exactly who she was because my intelligence team had been tracking her for months. Carter had been having an affair with her for over a year. "You really should send her home," Camilla continued, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We have a massive defense contract to steal tonight from some ghost CEO, and she is ruining your image." Camilla laughed loudly. She was completely unaware that she was staring directly into the eyes of the ghost CEO she was actively planning to rob. I simply smiled at her and prepared to end their entire world. Before Carter could even process the words echoing in the grand foyer, a wall of elite security personnel descended upon us. Two Secret Service agents stepped smoothly between my husband and me. They unhooked the heavy crimson velvet ropes of the VIP entrance and ushered me through with coordinated precision. Carter lunged forward instinctively, his face a mask of indignation. He attempted to follow in my wake, entirely accustomed to being the center of gravity in any room. A tall agent physically blocked his path, placing a firm hand against the lapel of Carter's expensive tuxedo. General admission must wait in the standard processing line, the agent stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. Carter sputtered, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed red as the surrounding guests turned to watch his humiliation. I did not look back. I simply smoothed the skirt of my dress and walked down the historic gilded halls of the East Wing. As my heels clicked against the polished marble floor, the encrypted Department of Defense mobile device hidden in my clutch began to vibrate violently. It was a continuous rhythmic buzzing that I knew immediately was Carter. I pulled the device free and glanced at the screen. The notifications were a barrage of furious, entitled text messages. "Who exactly did you sleep with to get VIP access?" read the first message. "You are humiliating me in front of my colleagues. Get back here right now and explain yourself." I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my bag. His vitriol was entirely predictable. For the 7 years of our marriage, Carter had operated under the delusion that he was the sole provider and the undisputed star of our household. His entire family shared this exact delusion. His mother, Beatrice, and his sister, Brittany, had spent nearly a decade endlessly mocking me for my career choices. To them, I was just a low-level IT consultant. They sneered at my remote work schedule, rolling their eyes whenever I attended family dinners in comfortable clothes after pulling 48-hour shifts. They frequently asked Carter why he settled for a woman who stayed home in sweatpants fixing broken hard drives. They treated me like a financial burden, completely blind to the reality of my existence. I let them believe it. I allowed Carter to pay the basic household bills so he could stroke his fragile ego. I allowed his mother to critique my simple wardrobe. It was the perfect cover. In reality, I was an active reserve colonel in United States Cyber Command. My days were not spent fixing civilian computers. They were spent running highly classified war games and developing offensive cyber capabilities for the Department of Defense. More importantly, I was the sole founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber Defense. My company held a legal valuation of $1.2 billion. I had built a massive defense contracting firm entirely from scratch, securing global military contracts that the people in Carter's political circles could only dream of touching. I kept my identity as the CEO strictly confidential. The military required discretion for my safety, but I also maintained the secret for a deeply personal reason. I wanted to observe my husband's true character. I wanted to see how he and his elitist family would treat a woman they believed was beneath them. Their relentless cruelty over the past 7 years had given me every answer I ever needed. I recalled the countless times Carter had diminished my presence. Just last Thanksgiving, he had loudly joked to his wealthy clients that my greatest contribution to society was making sure his internet router stayed connected. He paraded his political PR job as if he were personally running the country, demanding I iron his shirts and pack his briefcases while I was secretly managing global cyber threat deployments. The disparity between his inflated ego and his actual substance was staggering. My military colleagues knew me as a relentless tactician, a leader who commanded thousands of elite cyber warfare specialists. Carter knew me only as the quiet woman he could boss around. He thrived on my perceived mediocrity because it made him feel powerful. That power was an illusion I had carefully crafted, a test he had failed every single day of our marriage. The grand ballroom of the White House was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a sea of military dress uniforms and high-fashion evening wear. Waitstaff circulated with silver trays of champagne. I accepted a glass of sparkling water and made my way toward the back of the room, seeking out the specific defense officials I had come to brief. I found two four-star generals standing near a towering floral arrangement. They greeted me with warm handshakes and immediate respect, launching into a quiet, intense discussion about securing the new national defense grid from foreign intrusion. It was a highly sensitive conversation, one that required absolute focus. I was in the middle of breaking down a complex firewall architecture when I felt a sudden aggressive grip on my left shoulder. I turned sharply. Carter stood there, his chest heaving with exertion and fury. He had finally managed to bypass the agonizingly long security line. I knew exactly how he had done it. He had undoubtedly name-dropped a corrupt senator he consulted for bullying his way past the checkpoint attendants to hunt me down. His face was twisted in a mixture of anger and arrogant disbelief. He was completely blinded by his own ego, entirely incapable of reading the room or recognizing the heavy stars glittering on the uniforms of the men standing beside me. Carter tightened his grip on my shoulder, his fingers digging uncomfortably into my skin. He deliberately interrupted the generals mid-sentence, treating them as if they were insignificant obstacles in his path. "What kind of stunt are you pulling here, Rebecca?" He hissed, his voice a harsh, demanding whisper that carried over the polite hum of the ballroom. "Go fetch me a scotch right now. I need to do some real networking tonight, and you are standing in my way. Stop playing around and make yourself useful." I looked down at the hand gripping my shoulder, then up at his furious, entitled face. He had no idea that he had just committed professional suicide by grabbing a commanding officer in front of the Joint Chiefs. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse. Camilla stood there radiating pure arrogance. I looked at the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone and wondered exactly how much of Carter's secret credit card debt had paid for it. Carter wrapped his arm around her waist completely, ignoring the fact that I was his wife standing right in front of him. Camilla smirked and took a deliberate step toward me. She was holding a full glass of expensive red wine. With a highly theatrical gasp, she lunged forward, intentionally stumbling over her own designer heels. The dark liquid splashed directly across the bodice of my navy evening gown. The crystal glass dropped from her hand and shattered loudly on the polished marble floor. A group of wealthy socialites standing nearby gasped in shock and stepped back to avoid the mess. "Oh, I am so terribly sorry," Camilla said loudly. Her voice was pitched to draw the attention of half the room, but her eyes were entirely malicious. "You should really watch where you are standing. It is so crowded in here and you are just taking up space." Instead of defending me or even offering a napkin, Carter rushed forward to comfort his mistress. "Are you all right, Camilla?" he asked anxiously, pulling her away from the broken glass. He then turned to me with a look of absolute disgust. "Look at what you did, Rebecca. You are a complete social liability. You cannot even stand in a ballroom without causing a massive disaster. Go to the restroom and clean yourself up right now. Then call a cab and leave before you ruin my career any further." I did not cry. I did not run away in shame. I calmly pulled a clean cloth napkin from a passing waiter and dabbed the wine from my ruined dress. My expression remained terrifyingly serene. I took a slow, deliberate step back from them. I opened my clutch and pulled out my encrypted Department of Defense communications device. It was a heavy black phone that looked absolutely nothing like a civilian model. I pressed a single button connecting directly to the Central Security Command operating the gala. "We have a confirmed security breach at my location," I said quietly into the receiver. "Execute immediate extraction." Carter scoffed loudly, throwing his hands in the air. "Who are you calling?" he demanded. "A taxi company. I just told you to get out of here." I ended the call and slipped the device back into my bag. I did not have to wait long. Within 90 seconds, 4 grim-faced federal agents in tactical formal wear converged on our position. They moved with absolute military precision, parting the crowd of wealthy elites like the Red Sea. Carter puffed out his chest, preparing to name-drop his political connections to show off for Camilla. The head agent ignored him completely and stopped directly in front of me. "Orders, Colonel," he asked respectfully. I pointed a single finger at Camilla. "This lobbyist has had her security clearance flagged for corporate espionage," I stated coldly. "She is actively attempting to solicit classified military contracts. Escort her off the premises immediately and hand her over to the federal authorities waiting outside." Camilla dropped her smug smile instantly. "What are you talking about?" she shrieked. taking a step backward. Do you know who I am? I know senators. Carter stepped forward, trying to block the agents. There is a huge mistake here, he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. My wife is just a low-level computer repair worker. She does not have the authority to do this. You cannot touch Camilla. The lead agent did not even blink. He grabbed Camilla by the arm and secured her wrists with a swift, practiced motion. Ma'am, you are coming with us right now, he ordered. Camilla began to thrash and scream, kicking her designer heels against the marble floor. Her professional reputation was instantly vaporized in front of Washington's most powerful politicians and military leaders. The agents physically dragged her out of the grand ballroom while she sobbed and cursed my name. Carter was left standing alone in the center of the crowd, completely paralyzed with horrified shock. The surrounding guests were whispering and pointing at him. I looked at his pale, sweating face and smiled calmly. Now I am ready to go home, I told him. We were forced to leave the gala immediately to avoid any further scrutiny from the press and military officials. The car ride home was deafeningly tense. Carter gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He navigated the city streets in silence until we reached the highway, and then he finally exploded. You have completely ruined my life, he screamed, hitting the dashboard with his fist. You just alienated my most important business contact. You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. He drove recklessly, weaving through traffic while he berated me. My mother Beatrice was always right about you, Rebecca. She warned me not to marry low-class military trash. She told me you had no idea how to act in high society, and tonight you proved her right. You are a pathetic, vindictive woman who just destroyed my career out of pure jealousy. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing city lights. I let him vent his fury because every single word he spoke only cemented my plan to destroy his entire world. We pulled into the driveway of our beautiful suburban home. It was a house that I paid the mortgage on entirely by myself, while he pretended to his friends that he was the sole breadwinner. Carter slammed the car into park and turned to me with a venomous sneer. I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning, he announced coldly. I am taking half of your pathetic little computer repair business. I am taking this house, and I am taking your savings. You are going to be left with absolutely nothing. He pulled out his phone and unlocked the screen. He held it up to my face with a victorious, arrogant smirk. It was a screenshot of our joint banking application. I just want you to know how serious I am, he laughed bitterly. I already took care of my exit strategy. I looked at the glowing screen. He had illegally forged my signature to drain our entire joint savings account. $150,000 was completely gone. He had transferred the funds to a private offshore account to finance his new life with Camilla. You have nothing left, Rebecca, he whispered cruelly. I smiled back at him, feeling the cold steel of absolute certainty settling deep in my chest. He had no idea what was waiting for him inside that house. Camilla stood there, radiating pure arrogance. Her manicured hand gripped my husband's arm with a possessive tightness that told me everything I needed to know about their relationship. She was wearing a completely inappropriate bright red designer dress that plunged dangerously low cut to draw the eyes of every influential politician in the room. A heavy diamond necklace rested against her collarbone. I looked at those stones and instantly calculated their value, wondering exactly how much of Carter's secret credit card debt had financed that particular piece of jewelry. Carter wrapped his free arm around her waist, completely ignoring the fact that I was his legally wedded wife, standing right in front of him. He looked at her with a sickening kind of devotion that he had never once shown to me. It was the look of a man who believed he had finally secured his ticket to the upper echelons of Washington society. He truly believed Camilla was his equal, his partner in climbing the social ladder. He was so completely blinded by his own ambition that he could not see the venomous snake he was holding. Camilla smirked and took a deliberate, calculated step toward me. She was holding a full crystal glass of expensive red wine in her right hand. I watched her eyes dart quickly to my modest navy evening gown. It was a simple dress devoid of flashy sequins or designer labels chosen specifically to blend into the background. To Camilla, it was a symbol of my supposed inferiority. With a highly theatrical gasp, she lunged forward. She intentionally twisted her ankle, pretending to stumble over her own towering designer heels. It was an incredibly poor performance, but the execution was flawless. She thrust her arm out, and the dark crimson liquid flew from her glass in a wide, violent arc. The heavy red wine splashed directly across the bodice of my dress. It soaked through the fabric, instantly blooming into a massive dark stain that ruined the garment completely. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, sending a sudden shiver down my spine. A few drops splashed upward, hitting my face and neck. The heavy crystal wine glass slipped from Camilla's fingers and plummeted toward the floor. It shattered loudly on the polished marble, scattering razor-sharp shards of glass in every direction. The loud crash acted like a gunshot in the crowded ballroom. The polite hum of political networking and quiet laughter stopped immediately. A sudden heavy silence fell over our section of the room. A group of wealthy socialites standing nearby gasped in unison, stepping backward quickly to protect their own expensive gowns from the collateral damage. Every eye in the vicinity turned to stare at us. The air grew thick with that specific kind of morbid curiosity that wealthy elites harbor for public scandals. "Oh, I am so terribly sorry," Camilla said loudly. Her voice was pitched perfectly to ensure half the room could hear her, but her eyes were entirely malicious. They sparkled with a cruel, triumphant delight. "You should really watch where you are standing, Rebecca. It is so crowded in here, and you are just taking up too much space. You startled me." I waited for my husband to react. In any normal marriage, a husband would immediately step between his wife and the person who had just assaulted her. He would offer his jacket or grab a napkin to help dry the spill. He would defend her dignity in front of a room full of strangers. Instead, Carter rushed forward in a panic to comfort his mistress. "Are you all right, Camilla?" he asked anxiously, pulling her away from the broken glass and inspecting her red dress for imaginary stains. "Did any of the glass cut you? Please tell me you are okay." He patted her shoulders and fussed over her, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing less than 3 feet away, dripping in red wine. Only after he was absolutely certain that Camilla was unharmed did he turn his attention to me. His face contorted into a mask of absolute disgust. He looked at my ruined dress, not with sympathy, but with a deep, visceral revulsion. "Look at what you did, Rebecca," he yelled, his voice carrying easily across the silent crowd. "You are a complete social liability. You cannot even stand in a ballroom without causing a massive disaster." I simply stood there, letting the wine drip from the hem of my dress onto the marble floor. I did not speak. I let him dig his own grave. "I told you to stay out of my way," he continued, his anger escalating as he played to the audience of staring socialites. "I told you not to embarrass me tonight. You have absolutely no idea how to conduct yourself around people of influence. You are clumsy and socially inept. I cannot believe I brought you here. Go to the restroom and clean yourself up right now. Then call a cab and leave this building immediately before you ruin my career any further. You are making a fool of yourself and you are embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. Get out." The surrounding guests began to whisper behind their hands. They looked at me with pity and looked at Carter with quiet disdain, but no one intervened. In their world, this was just another dramatic marital collapse to gossip about over brunch the next morning. They expected me to burst into tears. They expected me to cover my face in shame and run fleeing from the ballroom like a humiliated child. Camilla certainly expected it. She stood behind Carter with a smug, victorious smile waiting for me to break. I did not cry. I did not run away in shame. I did not even raise my voice. I took a slow, deliberate breath and raised my hand to my face. Using the pad of my thumb, I calmly wiped a single drop of red wine from my cheek. I looked at the dark red stain on my thumb, and then I looked directly into Carter's eyes. My expression remained terrifyingly serene. The profound silence of my reaction seemed to unnerve him more than any screaming match ever could. His angry bravado faltered for a fraction of a second as he stared at my completely calm face. He had expected weakness and panic. Instead, he was met with the cold, calculated stillness of a military commander assessing a battlefield. The trap was set, and he had walked blindly right into the center of it. I took a slow step backward, distancing myself from the shards of broken crystal and the pooling red wine. The air in the ballroom felt thick with anticipation as dozens of wealthy socialites held their breath waiting for my inevitable breakdown. I did not give them one. Instead, I reached into my small evening clutch and wrapped my fingers around the heavy cold casing of my secure communications device. I pulled it out into the open. It was a thick black encrypted phone issued directly by the Department of Defense. It possessed no branding and no commercial interface. It was a tool built entirely for secure military logistics, and it looked completely alien against the backdrop of glittering evening gowns and tailored tuxedos. Carter let out a harsh, mocking laugh as he saw the device in my hand. "What exactly are you doing, Rebecca?" he demanded, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "Are you trying to call a taxi from the middle of the ballroom floor? Put that ridiculous thing away and get out of here before you humiliate me any further." Camilla leaned her head against his shoulder, letting out a breathy, condescending giggle. "Oh, let her make her little phone call, Carter," she sneered, adjusting the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Maybe she needs to call her supervisor at her little computer repair shop and tell them she had a spill." I ignored them both. I unlocked the device with a biometric scan and pressed a single pre-programmed button that connected directly to the Central Security Command operating the White House Gala perimeter. The line connected instantly without a single ring. "We have a confirmed security breach at my current coordinates." I said, my voice low, even and completely devoid of any panic. "Target is actively soliciting classified military contracts. Execute immediate extraction protocol." I ended the call and slipped the heavy black device back into my evening clutch. The satisfying click of the metallic clasp echoed in the tense silence between us. Carter stared at me, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He opened his mouth to berate me again, to demand to know who I was talking to with such authority, but the words died in his throat. It took exactly 90 seconds. The heavy ornate doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with a synchronized, forceful movement. 4 federal agents stepped into the room. They were not the standard event security guards hired to check invitations at the door. These men wore tactical formal wear with discreet earpieces and moved with terrifying, calculated military precision. They did not scan the room or wander through the crowd. They locked their eyes directly on our position and marched forward in a tight diamond formation. The sea of wealthy politicians, defense contractors, and socialites parted instantly. People instinctively stepped back, sensing the sudden aggressive shift in the atmosphere. Carter puffed out his chest, preparing to assert his perceived dominance. He stepped forward, shielding Camilla slightly, intending to name-drop his corrupt political connections to show off for his mistress. He opened his mouth, ready to demand answers from the approaching security detail. The lead agent did not even look at him. He bypassed Carter entirely, treating him like an invisible piece of furniture, and stopped squarely in front of me. The agent snapped to attention, his posture rigid and formal. "Awaiting your orders, Colonel." The lead agent stated, his voice booming across the sudden dead silence of our section of the ballroom. Carter froze. His jaw went slack and the color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He slowly turned his head to stare at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute horror and total incomprehension. Camilla dropped her smug smile instantly, her hand flying to her throat as she realized the gravity of the situation. I did not look at my husband. I pointed a single steady finger directly at Camilla. "This lobbyist has had her security clearance flagged for severe corporate espionage," I stated, my voice ringing out with icy authority. "She is an active threat to national security and is attempting to solicit classified Department of Defense contracts. Escort her off the premises immediately and hand her over to the federal authorities waiting outside the gates." The lead agent gave a sharp nod. "Yes, Colonel." He signaled to the other 3 agents, who moved forward with blinding speed. They grabbed Camilla by the arms, securing her wrists with swift, practiced motions that left no room for resistance. "What are you doing?" Camilla shrieked, the sound tearing through the elegant ballroom like a siren. "Let go of me right now. Do you know who I am? I know senators. I know generals. You cannot do this to me." Carter finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He lunged forward frantically, trying to block the agents from removing his mistress. "There is a huge mistake here," he yelled, his voice cracking with rising panic. "My wife is just a low-level IT worker. She fixes civilian computers. She does not have the authority to order this. You cannot touch Camilla. She is an important guest." The lead agent shoved Carter backward with a single effortless motion of his forearm, sending my husband stumbling awkwardly over his own polished shoes. "Step back, sir," the agent warned sharply. "You are interfering with a federal extraction." Camilla began to thrash wildly, kicking her expensive designer heels against the slick marble floor. She twisted and fought, but the agents held her in an iron grip. Her perfectly styled hair fell across her face in a tangled mess. The glamorous, sophisticated facade she had projected just moments ago was entirely shattered. As they physically dragged her backward toward the ballroom exit, she began to sob uncontrollably, cursing my name and screaming for Carter to do something to save her. He did nothing. He could do nothing. Washington's most powerful politicians and military leaders stood in stunned silence, watching the spectacular destruction of a prominent defense lobbyist. In less than 2 minutes, Camilla's entire professional reputation was vaporized. No one in that room would ever take her calls again. No defense contractor would ever risk being seen in her presence. Her career was dead and buried right there on the White House floor. The heavy ballroom doors closed behind the agents, cutting off Camilla's hysterical screams. The profound silence that followed was suffocating. Carter was left standing completely alone in the center of the crowd. His hands were shaking visibly. He looked around at the faces of the people he had spent years trying to impress. They were whispering behind their hands, pointing at him with quiet disdain. He had publicly tied himself to a woman who was just hauled away for corporate espionage by order of a military colonel he had been treating like a servant. I looked at his pale, sweating face and the absolute terror in his eyes. I offered him a calm, chilling smile. "I think I am ready to go home now," I told him. The walk from the grand ballroom to the valet stand felt like a funeral march for Carter's ego. The murmurs of the Washington elite followed us down the gilded corridors. Carter walked stiffly beside me, his face a mottled mask of rage and profound embarrassment. He snatched the keys from the valet without a single word of thanks and aggressively motioned for me to get into the passenger seat of his least luxury sedan. I slid into the leather seat, my posture perfectly straight, despite the damp wine stain chilling my skin. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing us inside the suffocatingly tense cabin. Carter gunned the engine. The tires screeched against the pristine pavement as we merged onto the main road, leaving the glowing facade of the White House behind us. For the first 10 minutes, he said absolutely nothing. His jaw was clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter. His knuckles were bone white as he gripped the steering wheel, navigating the dark city streets with reckless aggression. I sat quietly, watching the streetlights pass over his furious profile. I knew the explosion was coming. I was simply waiting for the inevitable detonation. It happened the moment we hit the interstate. "You have completely ruined my life," he screamed. His voice bounced harshly off the confined walls of the car, hurting my ears. He hit the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. "Do you have any idea what you just did, Rebecca? You just alienated my most important business contact. Camilla was going to secure my promotion. She was introducing me to people who actually matter, and you had her hauled out of there like a common criminal just because she spilled a little wine." I kept my eyes on the road ahead, refusing to engage with his delusion. "She poured a full glass of wine down my dress, Carter," I stated calmly, "and she was flagged for corporate espionage. I had nothing to do with her federal crimes." "Shut your mouth," he roared. "You did this out of pure spite. My mother was always right about you. Beatrice told me from day one that marrying you was a mistake. She warned me that you were nothing but low-class military trash. She said you had absolutely no idea how to act in high society, and tonight you proved her completely right. You are a pathetic and vindictive woman who just destroyed my entire career out of pure jealousy because you cannot stand being a nobody." His words were designed to cut deeply, to strip away my dignity and put me back in the submissive box he preferred. But his insults felt completely hollow. He was a weak man throwing a temper tantrum because his shiny toys had been taken away. He ranted continuously for the next 20 minutes, calling me a social liability, a financial burden, and a massive disappointment to his family name. He blamed me for his lack of success. He blamed me for the scene at the gala. He blamed me for the fact that his mistress was currently sitting in a federal interrogation room. We turned into our quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood. We pulled into the long driveway of the beautiful four-bedroom home that we shared. It was a house that I had meticulously selected. More importantly, it was a house that I paid the mortgage on entirely by myself every single month. Carter used his income to fund his designer wardrobe and his expensive dinners, pretending to his friends that he was the sole breadwinner of our household. He slammed the car into park and turned off the engine. The sudden silence in the vehicle was heavy and toxic. He unbuckled his seatbelt and twisted his body to face me. The blind rage in his eyes had morphed into a cold, calculating cruelty. "I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning," he announced, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening register. "I am completely done with you, Rebecca. I cannot spend another day tied to a woman who drags me down." I slowly turned my head to look at him. "Is that so?" I asked, my tone completely neutral. "Yes," he sneered, leaning closer to me. "And do not think you are going to walk away from this easily. I am taking half of your pathetic little computer repair business. I am taking this house. And I am taking every single penny of your savings. You are going to be left with absolutely nothing. My lawyer is going to bleed you dry in court until you are begging for mercy on the street." I looked at his arrogant, sneering face. He truly believed he held all the power. He believed he was the master strategist executing a flawless exit plan. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, unlocking the device and opening a specific financial application. He shoved the glowing screen directly into my face with a victorious, malicious smirk. "I just want you to know exactly how serious I am," he laughed bitterly. "I already took care of my exit strategy while you were busy trying to play the tough girl tonight." I looked at the screen. It was a digital receipt from our joint banking application. The balance on the screen read 0. He had illegally forged my signature on a digital authorization form earlier that afternoon. He had completely drained our joint savings account, transferring $150,000 into a private, untraceable offshore account. It was the money he intended to use to finance his glamorous new life with Camilla. "You have nothing left, Rebecca," he whispered cruelly, his breath hot against my face. "You are broke. You are alone. And you are a nobody. Get out of my car." I stared at the 0 balance on his phone. He expected me to cry. He expected me to panic and beg him to return the funds. Instead, I felt the cold steel of absolute certainty settling deep in my chest. He had no idea that the $150,000 was just a tiny decoy account I kept to maintain my cover. He had no idea that he had just committed federal wire fraud to steal what amounted to pocket change for a billionaire. I calmly opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air. I looked back at him sitting in his leased car, gloating over a stolen fraction of my wealth. He had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him inside that house. I unlocked the heavy oak front door of my home and stepped into the foyer. The quiet sanctuary I expected was entirely absent. Instead, the harsh glare of the living room lights spilled into the hallway. I walked forward and stopped in the archway. Sitting on my custom leather sofa, holding glasses filled with my vintage reserve wine, were Carter's mother Beatrice and his sister Brittany. Beside them sat a man in a cheap wrinkled suit clutching a faux leather briefcase. He had the unmistakable aura of a bottom-feeding family lawyer. Beatrice did not look embarrassed to be caught invading my home in the middle of the night. She took a slow sip of my wine and looked at my stained dress with a smirk of absolute triumph. "Carter called us," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "He told us about your little hysterical breakdown at the White House. He told us how you completely humiliated him in front of his important colleagues." Brittany chimed in, eagerly, leaning forward with a malicious grin. "We always knew you would snap eventually, Rebecca. You never belonged in his world. Camilla is a high society winner. She can elevate his career. You just fix computers in your pajamas. We have known about Camilla for a year, and we actively covered for him because Carter deserves a woman of status. I stood perfectly still, letting their toxic confessions hang in the air. They were proudly admitting to facilitating my husband's infidelity right inside the home I paid for. I did not yell or act betrayed. I simply looked at the lawyer sitting beside them. Beatrice set her wine glass down on my coffee table without using a coaster. She slid a thick stack of legal documents across the glass surface. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," she stated coldly. "You are going to sign over your half of this house and whatever pennies you have in your little savings account to my son. It is the absolute least you can do to compensate him for the severe emotional distress and the public humiliation you caused him tonight. Sign it and we will convince Carter to let you leave quietly without a messy public divorce." I walked slowly toward the coffee table. The air in the room was thick with their misplaced arrogance. I picked up the thick stack of papers. I flipped through the densely packed legal jargon. The document was completely predatory, designed to strip a dependent spouse of their basic rights. It demanded full transfer of my business assets, my real estate, and my personal banking accounts. I read the final page and a sound escaped my throat. It started as a low chuckle and quickly blossomed into a genuine hearty laugh that echoed loudly in the high-ceilinged room. Beatrice stiffened her face, contorting with immediate rage. "What exactly is so funny?" she snapped. "You are losing everything tonight." I dropped the absurd document back onto the coffee table. I looked directly at the sleazy lawyer who was sweating slightly under his cheap collar. "Tell me, counselor," I asked, my voice perfectly calm and measured. "Did you perform any actual financial due diligence during the discovery phase of drafting this document? Did you run a legitimate audit on my corporate holdings?" The lawyer puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "We have a full assessment of your computer repair business. We know it generates a modest income. We are prepared to seize it entirely if you refuse to sign." My laughter faded into a cold, terrifying smile. "A modest income," I repeated softly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my secure tablet. I tapped my complex biometric passcode into the screen. With a swift motion of my fingers, I synced my tablet directly to the massive smart television mounted on the living room wall. The screen flickered to life. "I suggest you look closely at the screen, Beatrice," I said. "This is the actual financial portfolio of my little computer repair business." Beatrice, Brittany, and the lawyer all turned their heads to look at the television. Displayed in crisp, high definition was the official corporate registry and financial overview of Aegis Cyber Defense. The screen highlighted global military contracts, secure server holdings, and the legal corporate valuation. The number was displayed in bold white text against a dark background. $1.2 billion. The room fell into a deafening dead silence. Beatrice dropped her jaw. Her eyes bulged as she stared at the massive string of zeros on the screen. Brittany let out a small, strangled gasp, dropping her wineglass onto the carpet. The dark liquid soaked into the rug, but she did not even notice. The sleazy lawyer turned the color of ash. He physically shrank back into the sofa, suddenly realizing he had just attempted to extort a billionaire defense contractor. "You see, Beatrice," I explained, pacing slowly across the living room. "I do not fix civilian computers. I build military-grade offensive cyber weapons for the Department of Defense. I own Aegis Cyber Defense entirely. I built it from scratch. I am the sole shareholder. That makes my personal net worth higher than the gross domestic product of several small nations. For 7 years, you and your entitled family have mocked me. You treated me like a financial burden while you lived off the scraps of my wealth that I allowed your son to access." The shock on their faces was profound. They had spent nearly a decade looking down on a woman who could buy and sell their entire bloodline before breakfast. But the shock did not last long. I watched in absolute fascination as the realization of my wealth washed over them, and their initial terror was rapidly replaced by a ravenous, sickening greed. Beatrice stood up, her hands shaking but her eyes gleaming with a sudden predatory hunger. She lunged forward and snatched the tablet off the coffee table, staring at the billion-dollar valuation. As his legal wife, half of this belongs to my son, she shrieked, her voice vibrating with sheer avarice. We are going to bleed you dry, Rebecca. We are going to take your entire company. Beatrice tapped her manicured fingernails against the glass surface of my coffee table. She pointed at the thick stack of legal papers demanding my immediate compliance. I walked slowly across the room and picked up the document. The paper felt heavy and crisp. I took my time flipping through the pages, reading the densely packed paragraphs. It was a masterpiece of predatory legal writing. The post-nuptial agreement demanded the immediate and irrevocable transfer of my business assets, my home, and every personal banking account I possessed. It even included a clause requiring me to pay for Carter's future living expenses. I reached the final page and a sound escaped my throat. It started as a low, quiet chuckle. Then it quickly blossomed into a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed loudly against the high ceilings of my living room. I could not hold it in. The sheer absurdity of their demands was hilarious. Beatrice immediately stiffened, her face contorted with sudden burning rage. What exactly is so funny? She snapped, her voice sharp and authoritative. You are losing everything tonight, Rebecca. You should be crying, not laughing. I tossed the ridiculous document back onto the coffee table. It landed with a soft thud. I looked directly at the family lawyer. He was sweating slightly under his cheap collar, clearly uncomfortable with my reaction. Tell me, counselor, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. Did you perform any actual financial due diligence during the discovery phase of drafting this legal garbage? Did you run a legitimate corporate audit on my holdings before you walked into my home and demanded I surrender them? The lawyer puffed out his chest, trying to project a sense of intimidation. He adjusted his tie and glared at me. We have a full comprehensive assessment of your little computer repair business, he stated arrogantly. We know it generates a modest income repairing civilian hardware. We are fully prepared to seize it entirely if you refuse to sign this agreement tonight. My laughter faded into a cold, terrifying smile. A modest income, I repeated softly, letting the words hang in the silent room. I reached into my purse and pulled out my secure military-grade tablet. I tapped my complex biometric passcode into the screen. With a swift, practiced motion of my fingers, I synced my tablet directly to the massive smart television mounted on the living room wall. The large screen flickered to life, illuminating the dark room with a bright blue glow. I highly suggest you look closely at the screen, Beatrice, I said, pointing at the television. This is the actual financial portfolio of my little computer repair business. Beatrice, Brittany, and the lawyer all turned their heads simultaneously. Displayed in crisp, high definition was the official corporate registry and the master financial overview of Aegis Cyber Defense. The screen highlighted global military contracts, secure server holdings across 5 continents, and our highly classified government partnerships. At the very bottom of the screen, the legal corporate valuation was displayed in bold white text against a dark background. The number was impossible to miss, $1.2 billion. The room fell into a deafening dead silence. Beatrice dropped her jaw completely. Her eyes bulged out of her head as she stared at the massive string of zeros glowing on the screen. Brittany let out a small, strangled gasp. Her hand went limp and she dropped her wineglass directly onto the carpet. The dark red liquid soaked into the expensive white rug, but she did not even notice the mess. The sleazy lawyer turned the color of wet ash. He physically shrank back into the cushions of the sofa, suddenly realizing he had just attempted to extort a billionaire defense contractor. He knew his legal career could be over in an instant. You see, Beatrice, I explained, pacing slowly across the living room floor. I do not fix civilian computers. I build military-grade offensive cyber weapons for the Department of Defense. I own Aegis Cyber Defense entirely. I built this company from absolute scratch. I am the sole shareholder and the chief executive officer. That makes my personal net worth higher than the gross domestic product of several small nations. For 7 long years, you and your entitled family have mocked me endlessly. You treated me like a financial burden while you lived off the tiny scraps of my wealth that I allowed your son to access. You thought I was weak, you thought I was poor, you were completely wrong. The shock on their faces was profound and deeply satisfying to watch. They had spent nearly a decade looking down on a woman who could buy and sell their entire bloodline before breakfast. They had ridiculed my clothes, my schedule, and my personality, while I secretly funded their comfortable suburban existence. But the shock did not last long. I watched in absolute fascination as the realization of my immense wealth washed over them. Their initial terror was rapidly replaced by a ravenous, sickening greed. The color returned to Beatrice's face. She stood up from the sofa. Her hands were shaking violently, but her eyes were gleaming with a sudden predatory hunger. She lunged forward and snatched the tablet off the coffee table. She stared greedily at the billion-dollar valuation on the screen. "As his legal wife, half of this money belongs to my son," she shrieked, her voice vibrating with sheer intense avarice. "We are going to bleed you dry, Rebecca. We are going to take your entire company and everything you own." Brittany jumped up beside her mother, her face twisted with greedy excitement. "You hid this from Carter," she yelled. "You lied to him about your money. The courts will give him everything to compensate for your deception." I stood my ground and looked at them with complete disgust. They had no idea what they were up against. The lawyer recovered his nerve quickly. "We will file an injunction." The empty threat of a civilian injunction never materialized. The cheap family lawyer was greedy, but he was not completely suicidal. He knew that attempting to legally freeze a classified military asset would result in an immediate visit from heavily armed federal agents. Beatrice and Brittany fled my home that night with nothing but their shattered egos and a deep sense of dread. However, Carter was not willing to surrender his delusions of grandeur. He chose a much more public and spectacularly foolish stage to execute his final desperate maneuver. 2 days later, the scene shifted entirely to the sunlit, sprawling campus of the Global Defense Technology Summit in Silicon Valley. It was widely considered the most prestigious military technology conference in the nation. The massive primary auditorium was packed to absolute capacity. The plush velvet seats were filled with high-ranking military brass foreign defense ministers and incredibly wealthy venture capitalists looking for the next billion-dollar government contract. The air in the room hummed with intense anticipation, and the sharp glare of high-definition spotlights illuminated the expansive main stage. Standing squarely in the center of that stage, completely bathed in the brilliant white light, was my husband. Beside him, wearing a sharp, tailored white business suit, stood Camilla. She had somehow managed to slither her way into the highly secure conference, despite her incredibly public removal from the White House gala. Her corrupt political backers had immediately pooled their vast resources and posted an exorbitant federal bail within hours of her arrest. The swift release allowed her to temporarily evade federal custody and join Carter for their grand presentation. They stood shoulder to shoulder, projecting an aura of immense, unshakable confidence. Carter gripped the microphone and stepped boldly toward the edge of the stage. He soaked up the polite applause from the distinguished audience, closing his eyes for a brief second to relish the spotlight. He truly believed he had won the war. He believed that the attempted cyber intrusion he initiated from his home office 2 nights ago had been a complete and total success. He genuinely thought he had bypassed my corporate firewall and successfully copied the core proprietary source code for the new Aegis cyber defense grid. He had absolutely no idea that my lead developer and I had actively monitored his incredibly clumsy intrusion and intentionally allowed him to download a specific encrypted file. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter began, his voice echoing powerfully through the massive sound system. "For the past 5 years, I have worked diligently in the shadows. While consulting for the political sector, I spent my late nights and weekends quietly developing a revolutionary approach to digital security. Today, I am incredibly proud to present an unhackable adaptive defense architecture that will completely redefine global military operations." The massive digital presentation screen behind them flared to life. It displayed sleek, high-tech interface mock-ups and scrolling lines of complex algorithmic data. Carter aggressively claimed that he had developed the entire architecture himself. He paced back and forth across the stage using complex technical buzzwords he clearly did not fully understand. He gestured passionately to the screens, presenting himself not as a public relations consultant, but as a visionary tech genius who is about to change the world. He stole my life's work and presented it as his own personal triumph, with zero hesitation or remorse. Camilla stepped up to the podium to deliver her portion of the fraudulent pitch. She used her slick lobbying skills to sell the concept directly to the wealthy foreign investors sitting in the front row. She spoke eloquently about how this proprietary system would neutralize any foreign cyber threat before it even reached the outer perimeter of a national grid. She flashed her brilliant, calculated smile, promising the military generals in the audience that this technology was the absolute pinnacle of modern digital warfare. They fed off each other perfectly, building a towering monument of lies right in front of the most powerful people in the defense industry. As the presentation continued, Carter's hubris swelled to a magnificent, terrifying size. He stopped pacing and stood dead center on the stage, gesturing broadly to a brightly colored graph displayed on the massive screen behind him. The graph depicted a series of simulated beta test results showing a 100% success rate against hostile intrusion. "The data you see behind me is not merely theoretical," Carter boasted, his voice ringing with pure, arrogant triumph. "We ran extensive beta tests on the core algorithm just yesterday. The results were absolutely flawless. In fact, the architecture is so remarkably stable, and the security protocols are so completely impenetrable that the global market has already responded." He paused for dramatic effect, leaning closely into the microphone with a smug, victorious smirk. "I am thrilled to officially announce today that our newly formed technology firm has already accepted a $5 million advance from a private consortium of international investors," Carter declared proudly. "They carefully reviewed our beta test metrics and immediately recognized that this code is the future of global defense. We are fully funded and we are ready to deploy this unhackable system to the highest bidder." A wave of impressed applause rippled through the packed auditorium. Wealthy investors jotted down notes on their tablets, and stern military officials murmured to each other in quiet approval. Carter stood under the blinding stage lights, literally soaking in the stolen valor. He closed his eyes again, letting the sound of the clapping audience wash over him like a warm wave. He was relishing his stolen status as a multi-million-dollar tech visionary. He felt invincible. He felt like a king who had just conquered a massive empire. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the code he was so proudly selling was a digital explosive waiting to detonate. He was entirely unaware of the trap that was about to snap violently shut around his neck. The applause died down, leaving a buzzing energy in the massive auditorium. Carter adjusted his custom suit and leaned casually against the sleek acrylic podium. "We have time for a few inquiries," he announced, his voice projecting smoothly. "I am happy to open the floor to any distinguished guests who want to delve deeper into the mechanics of this groundbreaking defense architecture." Camilla stood behind his right shoulder, wearing a predatory smile. They expected softball questions from eager venture capitalists. They expected to solidify their fraudulent empire right there on the stage. Before the moderator could pass a microphone, a heavy, echoing thud rang out. The massive oak double doors at the main entrance of the auditorium were pushed violently open. They hit the retaining walls with a sharp crack that silenced the room. Every head in the audience turned backward simultaneously. The bright stage lights illuminated the center aisle, creating a clear path from the entrance directly to the stage. I stepped through the open doorway and paused for a deliberate second. I was no longer wearing the modest civilian evening gowns or comfortable sweatpants my husband spent years mocking. I was wearing my immaculate, perfectly pressed United States military dress uniform. High-ranking decorations and service ribbons glittered brightly against my chest under the ambient lighting. The silver eagles denoting my rank as a full colonel sat proudly on my shoulders. My posture was rigid and my expression unreadable. I stepped onto the plush carpet of the center aisle and began my descent. My stride was measured, authoritative, and completely predatory. The rhythmic click of my polished uniform shoes echoed clearly in the silent space. As I walked past the back rows, the wealthy civilian investors stared in confused silence, but the dynamic shifted drastically as I reached the middle of the auditorium. The audience was heavily populated with top-tier military officials and veteran defense contractors. They instantly recognized the heavy authority radiating from my presence. A four-star general sitting in the front row stood up from his velvet seat. He straightened his uniform and snapped to attention. Seeing his reaction, two more generals stood up following suit. Within seconds, every military official and seasoned defense executive in the auditorium rose to their feet in a spontaneous display of profound professional respect. The civilian investors, sensing the massive shift in power, quickly stood up as well. The entire room was standing in absolute dead silence as I marched past them. Up on the brightly lit stage, Carter's arrogant smirk completely vanished. He squinted past the harsh glare of the spotlights, trying to focus on the imposing military figure marching toward him. When I stepped into the clear light at the front of the stage, he finally recognized my face. I watched his brain completely short-circuit. The sheer impossibility of the situation struck him like a physical blow. The color drained out of his face so rapidly his skin turned the color of wet chalk. His mouth fell slightly open and he gripped the podium so hard his hands began to shake. He stared at the silver eagles on my shoulders and the combat medals on my chest. This was the woman he had called a low-class social liability 2 nights ago. Camilla lost her triumphant smile instantly. She took a nervous step backward, bumping into the digital presentation screen. She looked from me to the standing generals and then to her paralyzed partner in crime. The reality of her catastrophic mistake was just beginning to dawn on her. I stopped at the very front of the center aisle directly below the stage. I stood exactly 10 feet away from my husband. An event moderator, completely intimidated by the silent, standing military officials, rushed forward and instinctively handed me a wireless microphone. I accepted it without breaking eye contact with Carter. The tension in the auditorium was thick enough to suffocate a man. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed sharply through the massive speakers, cutting through the dead silence with terrifying precision. You claim to have personally developed this unhackable architecture. I began, my tone devoid of emotion. You just stood before this assembly and accepted a $5 million advance based on the proprietary nature of this code. Since you are the sole architect, I have 3 very basic fundamental coding questions regarding the framework displayed on the screen behind you. Carter swallowed hard. A bead of sweat rolled down his pale forehead. He could not speak. He could only stare at me in absolute frozen terror. Question 1. I stated clearly, pacing slowly across the front row. How exactly did you resolve the memory allocation overflow within the primary kernel loop during the simulated attacks? The data on your slide indicates a flawless defense, but the specific sequence you are displaying inherently triggers a cascading memory failure after 4 minutes. Please explain your unique workaround. Carter opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The military officials turned to look at him, waiting. He looked down at his shoes, completely paralyzed. Question 2, I continued. You highlighted your custom cryptographic handshake protocol as the key to neutralizing foreign intrusion. However, the algorithm shown relies on an outdated encryption standard that was officially deprecated 3 years ago. Why integrate a vulnerable standard into an unhackable grid? The silence from the stage was deafening. The investors began to murmur to each other, looking from my uniform to Carter's sweating face. Question 3. I demanded, my voice echoing like a thunderclap. When the secondary firewall bypass is triggered by an authorized user, what specific failsafe prevents the master source code from executing a self-terminating protocol? If you wrote this code, you know exactly what failsafe I mean. Explain it right now. I stood holding the microphone, waiting for his answer, knowing he had absolutely no idea what any of it did. The silence stretching across the auditorium was absolute and suffocating. Carter stood frozen behind the sleek acrylic podium. The bright stage lights illuminated the heavy beads of sweat rolling rapidly down his temples. He opened his mouth, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces. The high-ranking military officials and the incredibly wealthy international investors were all waiting for his brilliant technical response. He gripped the edges of the podium so fiercely his knuckles turned stark white against the clear plastic. "Well," I asked, my voice echoing sharply through the massive sound system. "We are all waiting, Carter. You just accepted a $5 million advance for this groundbreaking architecture." A true tech visionary should have absolutely no trouble explaining the basic fail-safe mechanism of his own miraculous creation. Carter swallowed hard. His throat bobbed nervously as he attempted to lean into the microphone and salvage his rapidly shattering credibility. "The failsafe is a highly complex proprietary algorithm," he stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. "It utilizes a dynamic cloud-based integration to route the internal data through a secondary secured blockchain. It is highly technical and perhaps not suitable for a general overview at this precise moment." A collective groan of profound disappointment rolled through the massive auditorium. The seasoned defense contractors sitting in the front rows shook their heads in utter disgust. The foreign investors who had been ready to write massive checks began whispering angrily to their legal aides. They recognized meaningless corporate buzzwords instantly. They knew they were watching a complete fraud desperately trying to tread water in an ocean of his own lies. "That is an incredible compilation of meaningless jargon," I stated coldly, cutting through the rising murmurs of the angry crowd. "It is also completely incorrect. You cannot answer the question because you did not write a single line of that architecture. You stole it." "I did not steal anything," Carter yelled, his panic finally overriding his temporary paralysis. He pointed a visibly shaking finger at me. "You are lying. You are a vindictive, jealous woman trying to ruin my new company. This code belongs to me." I did not argue with him. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my military dress jacket and pulled out my secure encrypted tablet. I tapped the glass screen and entered my alphanumeric command sequence. "Let us test your bold claim," I said calmly. With a single deliberate motion, I executed the master override command. The massive digital presentation screen behind Carter instantly went completely black. The complex graphs and the sleek user interfaces vanished without a trace. For a split second, the stage was plunged into total darkness. Then the massive screen erupted in a blinding, brilliant red light that bathed Carter and Camilla in a harsh crimson glow. Massive, bold white letters flashed across the 50-foot screen for everyone to see. "Classified Department of Defense Property. Unauthorized access detected. Severity level Alpha." The entire auditorium gasped in unison. The military brass in the audience immediately recognized the highly restricted federal warning screen. The private investors who had just given Carter $5 million looked absolutely horrified. "2 nights ago you attempted a direct cyber intrusion from your home office," I explained, my voice ringing with absolute undeniable authority. "You believed you were executing a brilliant covert operation to bypass the external firewall of Aegis Cyber Defense. You thought you were downloading the proprietary source code for the next-generation national defense grid." Carter turned slowly to look at the massive red warning screen glowing ominously behind him. His jaw dropped open. The crushing reality of his catastrophic mistake was finally crashing down upon him. "You did not bypass anything." I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the stage. "My lead developer and I monitored your incredibly clumsy intrusion from the very first keystroke. We watched you stumble through our outer perimeter. Instead of blocking you, we intentionally guided you toward a honeypot. We allowed you to download a highly traceable digital decoy. The code you are currently running right now, the code you just proudly presented to this entire room as your own personal creation, is nothing but a military tracking beacon designed specifically to catch intellectual property thieves." The absolute devastation on Carter's face was beautiful to watch. His fraudulent tech empire had just evaporated into thin air. He was not a visionary genius. He was a rat caught in a very expensive military-grade trap. Camilla realized the catastrophic legal implications a fraction of a second before Carter did. She looked at the red warning screen and then looked in sheer terror at the wealthy investors sitting in the front row. The $5 million advance they had just accepted was no longer a brilliant business deal. It was massive federal wire fraud. It was the blatant theft of classified military assets. She lunged forward and shoved Carter hard against the acrylic podium. She snatched the microphone right out of his trembling hand. "He lied to me!" Camilla screamed into the microphone, her voice shrill with absolute panic. She pointed directly at Carter, throwing him completely under the bus without a single ounce of hesitation. He swore to me that he developed this architecture independently. He told me he owned the intellectual property outright. I had absolutely nothing to do with this theft. He manipulated me. He used my industry connections to secure the financial advance. Carter stumbled backward, looking at his mistress in sheer furious betrayal. "Camilla, you helped me download it," he yelled, his voice cracking over the speakers. "You told me exactly which defense contractors to target tonight. We planned this whole thing together." They turned on each other instantly, resembling two rabid animals trapped in a cage. They screamed vile accusations back and forth over the live microphone, publicly confessing to conspiracy and fraud in front of a room full of federal contractors and military generals. It was a spectacular, humiliating display of pure cowardice. I stood silently at the foot of the stage, watching them destroy each other. I did not need to say another word. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the very back of the main auditorium burst open with a deafening crash. The angry shouting on the stage stopped instantly. Everyone in the massive room turned around. A tactical team of heavily armed FBI agents marched through the doorway. They wore dark tactical vests with bold federal insignias printed across their chests. They moved with swift, terrifying purpose, marching straight down the center aisle toward the brightly lit stage. The lead agent held up a thick stack of legal documents. Carter and Camilla froze on the stage, their eyes wide with sheer unadulterated terror. There was nowhere to run. There was no corrupt politician who could save them now. Carter and Camilla, the lead agent, shouted, his voice booming through the silent auditorium. "We hold federal arrest warrants for both of you. You are being charged with severe corporate espionage, theft of classified government property, and multi-million-dollar wire fraud. Step away from the podium and put your hands where we can see them right now." Carter did not move. He stood completely paralyzed behind the clear acrylic podium as the heavily armed tactical agents swarmed the brightly lit stage. The lead agent did not wait for any sign of compliance. He grabbed Carter's shoulder and twisted his arms roughly behind his back, forcing him to bow forward. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the cavernous auditorium, acting as a final definitive punctuation to his fraudulent career. Camilla shrieked in absolute terror as a female agent secured her wrists, pushing her forcefully toward the edge of the stage. The wealthy international investors in the front row scrambled backward, knocking over their expensive leather chairs. They held up their smartphones, desperate to record the spectacular, high-profile downfall. Camera flashes erupted across the room like a violent lightning storm, illuminating Carter's pale, tear-streaked face. He looked out into the crowd and locked eyes with me. He gave me a wild, pleading look, begging for a miraculous rescue I would never provide. I simply turned my back on him. I adjusted the crisp cuffs of my military dress uniform and walked calmly down the center aisle. I left the auditorium without a single backward glance, letting the sound of his Miranda rights fade into the background. The media explosion was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. By the time I reached the back seat of my secure armored vehicle, the major news networks were already broadcasting live raw footage of the event. The headlines practically wrote themselves, detailing how a mid-level political public relations consultant attempted to rob a highly decorated military commander on a public stage. It was the ultimate Washington scandal. I did not waste a single second indulging in the public drama. I immediately called my corporate legal team and ordered them to file for a fault-based divorce, citing adultery and profound criminal misconduct. I wanted the heavy stack of legal paperwork waiting for Carter the exact second he was permitted his one phone call. While I returned to the quiet safety of my heavily guarded home, Carter was unceremoniously stripped of his custom-tailored designer suit. He was processed into a federal holding facility in a stark orange jumpsuit. He was locked in a cold concrete cell facing federal charges that carried decades in maximum security prison. His mother Beatrice was completely blindsided by the news. She frantically scrambled to secure his release, contacting shady bail bondsmen and desperately attempting to liquidate her retirement funds just to cover the massive federal bail requirements. Furious and facing total public ruin, Beatrice and her entitled daughter Brittany decided to launch a vicious coordinated counterattack. They quickly realized they could not possibly fight my legal team in a legitimate court of law, so they attempted to destroy me in the ruthless court of public opinion. They could not afford a reputable public relations firm, so they went straight to a sleazy online tabloid known for publishing highly sensationalized garbage. They painted a horrifyingly fictional picture of our 7-year marriage. Beatrice gave an exclusive, tearful interview to a bottom-feeding journalist claiming I was a manipulative and highly abusive spouse. She told the eager reporters that I had intentionally kept my billionaire status a secret to cruelly test her innocent, loving son. She painted Carter as a devoted husband who was constantly belittled by a cold, unfeeling military machine. Brittany gladly added fuel to the fire by claiming I used my high-ranking government connections to actively frame Carter for corporate espionage. She explicitly stated that I orchestrated the entire Silicon Valley sting operation simply to avoid paying Carter a massive divorce settlement. They spun a pathetic, intricate narrative portraying my treacherous husband as a dedicated family man who was ruthlessly set up by a calculating, greedy warlord protecting her precious assets. The fabricated tabloid story gained rapid traction across various unmoderated social media platforms. It was exactly the kind of scandalous military conspiracy theory that internet trolls and fringe commentators love to devour. People who had absolutely no understanding of classified defense architecture or complex corporate law began circulating the article wildly. They demanded immediate congressional investigations into my military conduct and called for boycotts of my company. The sudden negative digital attention caused minor but highly irritating headaches for my corporate communications team. My lead public relations director paced back and forth across the hardwood floor of my home office, begging me to release an aggressive counterstatement to crush the ridiculous rumors. She wanted to immediately publish the unedited security footage of Camilla screaming and throwing Carter under the bus on the summit stage. She desperately wanted to destroy Beatrice and Brittany in the mainstream press with undeniable facts. I absolutely refused to authorize any retaliation. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and ordered my entire executive team to maintain total radio silence. I knew exactly how arrogant narcissists operated when they felt cornered and desperate. If we actively engaged with their absurd tabloid fantasy, we would only validate their lies and give them the high-profile public fight they desperately craved. I told my staff that we would not react emotionally to the bait. We would remain perfectly still and wait in the shadows. Beatrice and Brittany were arrogant, completely desperate, and entirely out of their depth in this arena. They were bound to make a catastrophic legal error if I simply gave them enough rope to hang themselves. I knew their profound greed would eventually override their basic caution. They would not be satisfied with merely writing fake articles for cheap clicks. They would eventually want hard cash, and they would do something incredibly stupid and highly illegal to get it. I sat quietly in my secure home office, closely monitoring their digital footprints, and patiently waited for their inevitable trap to spring. I did not wait long for their greed to win. 3 days after Carter was dragged off the summit stage, my secure private email inbox pinged with a high-priority notification. The sender address was masked using a cheap virtual private network, but the subject line was explicit. It read, "Deal terms for Carter." I opened the message while sipping my morning coffee. The email was a chaotic masterpiece of desperate amateur extortion. Brittany had decided to take matters into her own hands. Attached were 6 manipulated digital photographs. They depicted a woman who looked vaguely like me, engaged in various illicit and highly compromising activities with foreign nationals. The Photoshop work was incredibly sloppy. The lighting angles were completely mismatched, and the shadows fell in opposite directions. It was a pathetic attempt at digital forgery, But her accompanying message made her malicious intentions crystal clear. Brittany demanded a direct wire transfer of $2 million to a specific offshore routing number. She also demanded that I immediately contact the federal prosecutor and officially drop all criminal charges against her brother. If I refused to comply within 48 hours, she promised to forward the doctored photographs to the Pentagon Inspector General and major news outlets. She gleefully stated that the scandal would trigger an immediate military tribunal, resulting in a dishonorable discharge that would permanently destroy my military career and my corporate reputation. She truly believed she was a criminal mastermind executing a flawless blackmail scheme. She thought a few poorly edited images would bring a billionaire cyber warfare commander to her knees. I did not feel threatened. I felt a profound sense of secondhand embarrassment for her sheer stupidity. She was attempting to digitally blackmail a woman who owned the company that designed encryption protocols for the Department of Defense. I did not reply to her ridiculous email. I tapped a few keys and forwarded the message package to the lead forensics director at my cyber intelligence division. I added a single line of text to the work order. I told my team to trace the origin metadata and rip the sender's digital life apart down to the last byte. They were given full authorization to deploy our most advanced tracking software to find her. I sat back and returned to reviewing my daily corporate briefings. I knew my team would make quick work of the assignment. It took exactly 45 minutes for my private secure phone to ring. My lead digital forensics director sounded almost bored as he delivered his report. He informed me that the sender had used a commercially available masking software that was laughably easy to bypass. They had traced the original metadata embedded deep inside the fake photographs directly back to a specific Internet Protocol address. It was the address registered to Brittany's personal laptop located inside her luxury apartment. She had not even bothered to scrub the device identifiers from the image files before sending them to me. Her technical incompetence was truly astounding, but my team did not stop at simply tracing the email. Once they had located her active device on the network, they executed a remote forensic sweep to ensure she had not distributed the fake photos to any secondary locations. During that sweep, they stumbled upon something absolutely incredible. My director informed me that Brittany had a massive, unencrypted hidden folder sitting right on her primary hard drive. The folder was completely unprotected. When my team opened it to check for the doctored images, they found a highly detailed digital ledger. The contents of that ledger were staggering and extremely incriminating. For the past 4 years, Brittany had been employed as the regional financial director for a highly prominent national children's charity. She constantly bragged about her charitable work at family dinners to prove her moral standing. The unencrypted folder contained hundreds of altered spreadsheets, fake vendor invoices, and offshore bank routing numbers. The irrefutable digital proof showed that Brittany had been systematically embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the charity. She had been diverting donations meant for sick children directly into her own private accounts. She used the stolen funds to finance her lavish lifestyle, her designer handbags, and her frequent luxury vacations. She was a complete fraud, stealing from the most vulnerable members of society. She was so incredibly arrogant that she kept the meticulously detailed records of her massive federal crimes sitting in an unencrypted desktop folder on the exact same laptop she used to attempt a federal extortion scheme. I instructed my director to securely package every single file, every fake invoice, and every bank routing number found in that hidden folder. We compiled the undeniable evidence into a massive, secure digital dossier. It was a complete map of her criminal activities over the last 4 years. I did not call Brittany. I did not threaten her or demand any kind of negotiation. I simply took the compiled dossier and anonymously forwarded the entire package to the personal email addresses of every single member sitting on the board of directors for the children's charity. I also sent duplicate copies directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the local police department and the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I ensured the delivery was untraceable back to me. I hit send and calmly closed my laptop. Brittany had wanted to play a dangerous high-stakes game of extortion. She thought she was a ruthless high society winner who could easily outsmart a woman she considered low class. Instead, she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to permanently destroy her entire life. By the time she woke up the next morning, her employer would be calling the authorities. The police would be knocking on her apartment door with a search warrant and federal charges. She had sealed her own fate completely. She did it all without me ever having to leave the comfort of my home office. Carter was completely out of options. He had been out on federal bail for exactly 4 days, and his entire reality had already collapsed around him. He was facing decades in a maximum security penitentiary for his incredibly public stunt at the defense summit. His expensive legal team had abandoned him the exact second his retainer funds dried up. To make matters infinitely worse, he had just learned that his mother and sister were facing their own catastrophic criminal charges. Beatrice was entirely consumed by the impending rapid foreclosure on her luxury estate, and Brittany was actively dodging relentless calls from the local police regarding her massive charity embezzlement. The comfortable, arrogant safety net that had protected him his entire life was completely gone. He was backed into a corner, and cornered animals are exceptionally dangerous. His desperation mutated into a wild, erratic fury. He blamed me for every single consequence he was currently facing. In his twisted, entitled mind, I was the vicious villain holding the keys to his salvation. He convinced himself that if he could just get his hands on the actual functioning source code for the Aegis cyber defense grid, he could sell it on the international black market for tens of millions of dollars. He thought he could use that illicit cash to pay off a smuggler and flee the country before his federal trial ever began. He was so blinded by panic and greed that he completely disregarded the strict restraining order my legal team had placed against him. He decided to take what he believed was rightfully his by sheer force. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when he finally made his move. A heavy, freezing rain was pouring down over the city, creating a dense wall of noise that masked his approach. I was sitting awake in my private quarters reviewing security protocols on my tablet when the outer perimeter sensors alerted me to a hostile presence. I pulled up the high-definition night vision camera feeds. I watched through the glowing screen as Carter crept through my backyard. He was wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He looked incredibly pathetic, stumbling through the wet grass like a common, desperate burglar. In his right hand, he gripped a heavy, solid steel crowbar. He approached the thick glass of the back patio door. He did not bother trying to pick the lock or bypass the keypad. He raised the heavy crowbar and smashed it violently against the glass pane. The reinforced glass held for a fraction of a second before shattering inward with a loud crash that was swallowed by the driving rain. He reached through the jagged hole, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped into my dark, quiet kitchen. I watched him breathe heavily, his chest heaving with a potent mix of adrenaline and fear. He gripped the crowbar tighter, leaving muddy footprints across my pristine hardwood floors. His intention was brutal and abundantly clear. He planned to march upstairs, drag me out of my bed, and physically threaten me with that steel bar. He wanted to drag me into my home office and force me to unlock my secure biometric safe. He firmly believed the master flash drives containing the true defense grid source code were sitting inside that steel box. He was entirely prepared to use physical violence to get exactly what he wanted. He moved out of the kitchen and crept down the long, dark hallway toward my primary home office. He moved with a sloppy, desperate urgency. He kept checking over his shoulder, terrified that the noise of the shattering glass had woken me from a deep sleep. He had absolutely no idea that I was already wide awake, safely secured inside a reinforced steel panic room upstairs, watching his every single move on a grid of high-definition monitors. I did not call the local police. I simply watched his monumental stupidity unfold in real time. Carter reached the heavy, solid wood door of my home office. He paused for a moment, pressing his ear against the wood to listen for any movement inside. Finding only silence, he gripped the heavy steel crowbar with both hands. He jammed the flattened wedge of the tool into the narrow gap between the door and the frame right above the deadbolt. He leaned his entire body weight against the bar, grunting with exertion. The thick wood splintered and cracked under the immense pressure. With a final violent shove, the doorframe gave way completely. The heavy door swung inward, hitting the interior wall with a loud, resounding bang. He stood panting at the doorway, staring into the pitch-black office. He raised his wet boot and took a triumphant step forward, crossing the threshold. He truly believed he had just broken into a standard civilian workspace. He thought he was walking into a normal room filled with boring filing cabinets and a simple commercial wall safe. He was catastrophically wrong. The second the toe of his wet boot crossed that doorway, he severed an invisible laser tripwire. He did not trigger a standard commercial burglar alarm that calls a local civilian dispatcher. He instantly tripped a highly classified silent military-grade perimeter defense system. That specific threshold was officially designated as a highly restricted federal access point. Carter stood in the dark office, completely unaware that his single footstep had just initiated an automated high-priority threat response protocol. He did not hear any blaring sirens. He did not see any flashing strobe lights. He simply wiped the cold rain from his face and gripped his crowbar, preparing to ruthlessly loot my safe. He had absolutely no idea that the silent alarm had just transmitted his exact coordinates directly to the Armed Regional Command Center of the Department of Homeland Security. Carter stepped completely through the shattered doorframe, walking toward the center of the room. He raised his flashlight, swinging the beam across the walls, searching for a commercial wall safe. Instead, he found empty space. The room was devoid of civilian furniture. Before his confused brain could process this, the automated defense protocol initiated. A mechanical whirring sound erupted. Thick panels of reinforced titanium steel slammed down over the two large windows, instantly sealing out the cold rain. At the exact same moment, a solid steel blast door dropped violently from the ceiling frame right behind him, crashing into the floor tracks with a deafening metallic boom. Heavy magnetic locks engaged simultaneously, sealing the room with millions of pounds of magnetic pressure. He was trapped. Carter dropped his flashlight. The plastic casing cracked, sending a beam of light spinning across the steel cage. He spun around and sprinted back toward the doorway he had just destroyed. He slammed his bare hands against the flat surface of the magnetic blast door, pushing with all his might, trying to find a release lever. There was nothing but smooth, impenetrable metal. He raised his steel crowbar and swung it wildly against the door. The metal bar bounced off the titanium surface, sending a painful shockwave up his arms. He hit the door again, letting out a primal scream. He thought he had triggered a fancy home security system. He had no idea he was currently locked inside a Department of Defense-level containment cell, pacing like a trapped animal while being broadcast in high definition. I was sitting comfortably upstairs inside a reinforced, secure panic room located directly above him. The climate-controlled air was warm and soothing, a stark contrast to the freezing storm outside. I sat in a plush leather chair, holding a steaming cup of herbal tea, watching him on a grid of high-definition infrared security monitors. He looked incredibly small and pathetic on the screen, beating his expensive crowbar against the containment walls. He was a man who had spent his entire life bullying people he believed were beneath him, and now he was reduced to a weeping, desperate burglar locked in a steel box. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I pressed a glowing green button on my secure communications console. The intercom system inside the containment cell cracked to life. "Carter?" My voice echoed coldly from hidden speakers inside the steel room. "You look incredibly foolish right now." Carter froze, instantly dropping the crowbar and looking wildly up at the ceiling to locate the source of my voice. "Rebecca," he yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Turn this off right now. Open this door. You are going to let me out of here before I get really angry. You are crossing a massive legal line by trapping me in here." I smiled at the monitors, taking another sip of my tea. "You really do not understand the gravity of your situation, Carter," I said smoothly. "You did not just break into your ex-wife's suburban home to steal corporate documents. You just forcefully breached a highly classified federal access point housing direct connections to secure military servers. The moment your foot crossed that threshold, you initiated a federal domestic terrorism protocol. You are dealing with the Department of Homeland Security." The blood drained completely from his face. He stared blindly up at the ceiling speaker as the terrifying reality of his actions finally crushed his arrogant delusions. "You are lying," he whispered, stepping backward until his back hit the cold steel of the window shutters. "You are just trying to scare me. You cannot do this to me. I am your husband." I leaned closer to the microphone. "You stopped being my husband the second you flaunted your mistress in front of the Joint Chiefs," I replied calmly. "The tactical response team is already surrounding the perimeter of this property. They only care that an unauthorized hostile target just attempted to access classified military data by force. You are going away for a very long time, Carter." I released the intercom button, leaving him in terrifying silence. Carter lost his mind. The reality of his impending federal charges shattered his fragile psyche into a million pieces. He picked up his crowbar and began smashing it relentlessly against the steel walls, sobbing uncontrollably. He screamed for mercy, begging me to open the doors, and promising he would disappear and never bother me again. He threw his entire body weight against the unyielding metal, bruising his shoulders and tearing the skin on his hands. He fell to his knees on the carpet, gasping for air as tears dripped down his face. He curled his hands into fists and pounded on the floor, completely defeated by the very woman he had called a pathetic nobody. 3 minutes later, the front gates of my property were breached. A fleet of black armored vehicles silently rolled up my long driveway, their headlights cutting through the freezing rain. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents poured out of the vehicles, moving with terrifying tactical precision. They secured the perimeter of my home in seconds before advancing on the shattered back patio door. I watched on my external security monitors as the tactical team stacked up outside the containment cell. I tapped a command into my console, disengaging the primary magnetic seal on the blast door. The heavy steel panels slid upward with a sharp hiss of pressurized air. The federal agents swarmed into the office, tackling Carter to the ground. He screamed, thrashing wildly, but was completely outmatched. Flex cuffs snapped around his wrists, echoing through my audio feed. They dragged him to his feet as he wept, begging them to let him go. They marched him out toward a waiting armored transport vehicle. I took one final peaceful sip of herbal tea, watching the flashing red lights disappear down my driveway. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the freezing rain, marking the absolute end of Carter's arrogant delusions. 3 months passed quickly. The slow, grinding wheels of the federal justice system began to turn, crushing what little remained of his pathetic ego. My legal team moved with aggressive precision. They successfully petitioned the federal judge to consolidate our divorce proceedings with the civil restitution hearings. They wanted everything handled in one crushing blow. I walked into the grand mahogany-paneled courtroom on a crisp Tuesday morning. I wore a sharp, tailored charcoal business suit. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was entirely unreadable. I sat down at the heavy wooden plaintiff table, flanked by 3 of the most ruthless corporate litigators in the country. We looked like a firing squad waiting for the command to execute. Across the wide center aisle sat my soon-to-be ex-husband. Carter looked absolutely terrible. He was wearing an ill-fitting prison-issue suit that his mother Beatrice had likely begged the warden to let him wear. His face was pale and drawn. He had lost significant weight during his time in federal holding. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the defense table. The smug, entitled public relations consultant, who used to berate me for wearing sweatpants, was gone. In his place sat a broken, terrified man facing decades behind bars. Sitting right next to him was the same sleazy, aggressive family lawyer who had tried to extort me in my own living room 3 months ago. The lawyer looked nervously at my formidable legal team, but puffed out his chest, trying to project false authority. He was preparing to make one final desperate attempt to save his client and secure a massive payday for himself. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Honorable Davis, banged her wooden gavel to call the courtroom to order. She looked down at the stack of legal files sitting on her desk and signaled for the defense to begin their opening statements. Carter's cheap lawyer stood up quickly. He walked to the center of the courtroom floor. He cleared his throat loudly, preparing to deliver the most ridiculous and deeply offensive legal defense I had ever heard. "Your Honor!" The sleazy lawyer began, his voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "My client Carter is not a criminal mastermind. He is not a corporate spy or a malicious hacker. He is simply the tragic victim of a powerful, vindictive, and highly dangerous military officer. He pointed a dramatic finger in my direction. He claimed that I had intentionally orchestrated a massive, complex setup to ruin an innocent man. He told the judge that I had deliberately kept my billionaire status a secret for 7 years, specifically to emotionally abuse and test my husband. He spun a wild, elaborate fairy tale portraying me as a calculating, greedy warlord who used her classified government connections to completely destroy a civilian. According to the defense, I had intentionally planted the honeypot source code on my home network, knowing Carter would eventually find it. The lawyer argued that I actively encouraged the corporate espionage simply to trigger a federal arrest. The motive he claimed was pure, unadulterated financial greed. He stated that I wanted to avoid paying my loyal, loving husband a fair and equitable divorce settlement, so I framed him for treason instead. Carter sat at the defense table, nodding along with tears welling in his eyes, playing the role of the battered, abused spouse to absolute perfection. The lawyer then moved to his primary objective. He formally petitioned the court for an absolutely massive financial settlement. He demanded a permanent spousal support order of $100,000 per month to compensate Carter for severe emotional distress and trauma. But he did not stop there. He brazenly argued that since Aegis Cyber Defense was built and expanded during the 7 years of our legal marriage, it constituted community property. He looked directly at the judge and officially demanded that the court award Carter exactly 50% of my $1.2 billion company. The sheer audacity of his request echoed through the silent courtroom. The demand was so wildly delusional that even the court stenographer paused her typing for a fraction of a second to stare at the defense attorney. I sat completely still at the plaintiff table. I did not roll my eyes. I did not scoff or whisper angry retorts to my legal team. I did not give Carter the satisfaction of seeing any emotional reaction whatsoever. I maintained the exact same terrifyingly serene expression I wore on the night Camilla poured red wine down my dress. I simply let the desperate lawyer dig a massive, inescapable legal grave for himself and his client. Judge Davis looked over her reading glasses at the defense attorney. Her expression was highly skeptical, but she remained professionally neutral. She jotted a quick note on her legal pad and turned her attention to my side of the courtroom. She asked my lead counsel if we had an initial response to these outrageous claims of entrapment and marital asset division. My lead attorney, a brilliant silver-haired litigator who specialized in complex corporate divorce, stood up slowly from his leather chair. He did not yell or launch into an emotional tirade defending my character. He buttoned his suit jacket with a calm, practiced motion and smiled politely at the judge. "Your Honor," my attorney said, his voice smooth and incredibly confident. "The plaintiff completely denies these baseless and highly defamatory allegations. We do not need to entertain a lengthy debate regarding my client's moral character or the origin of her highly classified corporate assets. We believe the absolute truth will be best served by examining the definitive evidence and hearing directly from a witness who can verify the true nature of this situation." My attorney turned toward the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom. He formally requested permission from the judge to call our very first star witness to the stand. I folded my hands neatly on the table and watched the color drain completely out of Carter's face. He realized too late that my silence was not a surrender. It was the calm before a devastating, lethal strike. The heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud. The low murmurs of the gallery ceased instantly. Stepping across the threshold was the highly decorated Three-Star Admiral from the White House Gala. He wore his immaculate service dress uniform covered in rows of commendations that spoke of decades of elite military service. He marched down the center aisle with absolute authority, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. The bailiff immediately stood up to hold the gate open for him. Judge Davis leaned forward, resting her elbows on her high desk, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized the sheer magnitude of the witness my attorney had just called into her civilian courtroom. Carter shrank into his chair, His sleazy lawyer furiously flipped through his legal pads, desperately searching for a procedural loophole to object to the unexpected arrival. He found nothing. The Admiral raised his right hand, swore the oath, and took a seat in the witness stand. He adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the judge. My attorney approached the podium. "Can you please state your name and your professional relationship to the plaintiff?" he asked respectfully. The Admiral stated his name and his prestigious rank within the Department of Defense. "I am here today serving as an official character witness and a designated representative of the United States military," he stated, his voice booming through the quiet room. "I have worked directly with Colonel Rebecca for 6 years. Her moral character is absolutely impeccable, and her service to this nation is unparalleled. Furthermore, I am here to officially enter a matter of federal record into this civilian proceeding. The cybersecurity architecture developed by Aegis Cyber Defense is classified government infrastructure. It is entirely and legally owned by the plaintiff, a fact established years prior to her marriage to the defendant. It is not a community asset, and any civilian attempt to claim ownership of it is a direct violation of federal law." Carter's lawyer jumped to his feet, his face red with panic. "Objection, Your Honor," he shouted. "This is a divorce hearing, not a military tribunal. My client has a right to the financial growth of a company built during his marriage." Judge Davis glared at the defense attorney. "Overruled," she snapped sharply. "I will hear what the Admiral has to present. Sit down, counselor." The lawyer sank back into his chair, looking thoroughly defeated. The Admiral did not stop at simply delivering a flawless character reference. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a secure, encrypted flash drive. With the judge's explicit permission, a court clerk connected the drive to the central evidence monitor facing the gallery. The screen illuminated, displaying highly detailed digital logs. "What you are seeing are intercepted encrypted communications," the Admiral explained, gesturing to the screen. "When the defendant Carter forcefully breached a secure federal access point in his attempt to steal classified source code, our intelligence division ran a full sweep of his digital footprint. We uncovered irrefutable evidence of active treason. These are direct messages between Carter and his accomplice Camilla. They were actively negotiating with known foreign entities to sell the stolen architecture for $50 million. He was fully aware of the highly classified nature of the asset, and he intentionally sought to compromise national security for his own personal financial gain." The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps. Judge Davis stared at the undeniable proof of treason displayed on the monitor. Her expression morphed from professional neutrality to profound, utter disgust. She looked down at Carter as if he were a poisonous insect that had crawled onto her bench. Carter's sleazy lawyer physically slumped in his chair. He dropped his expensive fountain pen onto the table and buried his face in his hands. He realized in that exact moment that the case was completely and utterly lost. He pushed his chair slightly away from Carter, silently severing any remaining professional solidarity with his radioactive client. Carter sat completely paralyzed, staring at the digital evidence of his own destruction. There was absolutely no defense. There was no manipulative spin that could save him from the crushing weight of the federal government. Judge Davis picked up her heavy wooden gavel. "I have heard enough," she declared, her voice laced with cold fury. "The claims made by the defense are not only entirely baseless, but they border on the edge of criminal perjury. I am ruling immediately on the matter of the divorce and civil restitution. I completely deny the defendant's outrageous request for spousal support. You will not receive a single cent from the plaintiff. Furthermore, I am issuing a direct civil order compelling the defendant to immediately repay the $150,000 he fraudulently transferred out of the joint banking account." She struck the sounding block with a loud, definitive crack. Carter dropped his head onto the defense table, sobbing quietly as his entire fraudulent existence was wiped away by a single judicial ruling. Suddenly, a harsh, shrill voice pierced the quiet courtroom. "You cannot get blood from a stone," Beatrice screamed. I turned in my chair to see my former mother-in-law standing up in the second row of the gallery. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure triumphant malice. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at me, completely ignoring the bailiff's loud commands to sit down and remain silent. He has absolutely no money to repay you, Beatrice yelled, her voice vibrating with toxic glee. His accounts are completely empty and he is going to federal prison. You get nothing, Rebecca. And you cannot kick us out on the streets because you do not even own your precious home anymore. A wave of confused murmurs rolled through the gallery. Judge Davis reached for her gavel again, preparing to hold the screaming woman in contempt of court, but Beatrice refused to be silenced. She wanted to deliver what she believed was a devastating fatal blow. The courtroom was absolutely captivated by her unhinged outburst. The wealthy socialites who had come to watch my downfall were now witnessing a stunning display of pure, desperate villainy. Beatrice stood there breathing heavily, her designer clothes looking suddenly cheap against the backdrop of her own confessed financial crimes. "I took out a secret secondary mortgage on your beloved house," Beatrice shrieked, laughing maniacally. "I used Carter's legal power of attorney while you were busy trying to play soldier. I pulled out $3 million against your property. If my son goes down and defaults on that massive loan, your house goes straight to the bank." She truly believed she held the ultimate trump card that would leave me destitute and broken on the streets of Washington. "You are going to be completely homeless, Rebecca." We were standing at the security checkpoint of a White House gala when my husband grabbed my arm. "Keep your mouth shut about your boring computer job and do not embarrass me," he hissed. I did not argue. I simply handed the Secret Service agent my digital clearance. The scanner flashed a vibrant green alert. The agent stopped breathing. He stepped back and tapped the shoulder of a highly decorated Three-Star Admiral. The Admiral turned locked eyes with me and snapped a flawless salute. "Colonel, we have been waiting for you," he announced. "The Joint Chiefs are inside." My husband stared at me in pure horror. "My name is Diana, and I am 34 years old. For 6 years, I played the role of the quiet and docile wife to Bradley. He was a 36-year-old political public relations consultant who built his entire identity on designer suits and networking events. To him and his wealthy family, I was just a low-level IT worker who stayed home in sweatpants. His mother, Patricia, constantly reminded me that I lacked the elegance required for their high society circles. His sister Felicity endlessly bragged about her own accomplishments while treating me like a financial burden. I let them believe whatever made them feel superior. I never told them my boring computer job was actually my role as the sole founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber Defense. I also never mentioned I was an active reserve colonel in United States Cyber Command. Keeping my life classified protected my country and gave me the perfect vantage point to observe exactly who my husband truly was. The East Wing security checkpoint was swarming with Washington elites. Bradley adjusted his custom tuxedo and looked at my simple black evening gown with blatant disgust. He handed his gold-embossed invitation to the lead agent and waved his hand vaguely in my direction. "She is my +1, he said loudly, ensuring the people behind us heard him. "Try not to embarrass me tonight, Diana." I stepped forward and held up my phone. The agent scanned my encrypted code. The machine immediately triggered a priority alert. The agent straightened his posture and alerted the Admiral. When the Admiral saluted me and called me Colonel, the entire security line fell dead silent. Bradley blinked rapidly. His smug smile vanished. "What is going on?" he demanded, looking from the Admiral to me. Before Bradley could demand answers, an elite security detail surrounded me. They ushered me through the velvet ropes toward the VIP entrance. Bradley attempted to follow me, but a Secret Service agent placed a firm hand on his chest. "General admission must wait in the standard line," the agent stated flatly. As my heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the historic gilded halls, my encrypted Department of Defense mobile device began to vibrate violently. It was a continuous rhythmic buzzing that I knew immediately was Bradley. I pulled the device free and glanced at the screen. The notifications were a barrage of furious, entitled text messages. "Who exactly did you sleep with to get VIP access?" read the first message. "You are humiliating me in front of my colleagues. Get back here right now and explain yourself." I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my bag. His vitriol was entirely predictable. For the 6 years of our marriage, Bradley had operated under the delusion that he was the undisputed star of our household. He thought I was weak, He thought I was poor. He paraded his political job as if he were personally running the country, demanding I iron his shirts and pack his briefcases, while I was secretly managing global cyber threat deployments. The disparity between his inflated ego and his actual substance was staggering. The grand ballroom of the White House was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a sea of military dress uniforms and high-fashion evening wear. I accepted a glass of sparkling water and made my way toward the back of the room, seeking out the specific defense officials I had come to brief. I found two generals standing near a towering floral arrangement. They greeted me with warm handshakes and immediate respect, launching into a quiet, intense discussion about securing the new national defense grid from foreign intrusion. I was in the middle of breaking down a complex firewall architecture when I felt a sudden aggressive grip on my left shoulder. I turned sharply. Bradley stood there, his chest heaving with exertion and fury. He had finally managed to bypass the agonizingly long security line by dropping the name of a corrupt senator he consulted for. His face was twisted in a mixture of anger and arrogant disbelief. He was completely blinded by his own ego, entirely incapable of reading the room or recognizing the heavy stars glittering on the uniforms of the men standing beside me. He tightened his grip on my shoulder, his fingers digging uncomfortably into my skin. He deliberately interrupted the generals mid-sentence, treating them as if they were insignificant obstacles in his path. "What kind of stunt are you pulling here, Diana?" He hissed, his voice a harsh, demanding whisper. "Go fetch me a drink right now. I need to do some real networking tonight and you are standing in my way. Make yourself useful for once." I looked down at the hand gripping my shoulder, then up at his furious, entitled face. I was about to calmly explain the reality of his situation when a wave of heavy floral perfume washed over us. A woman stepped out from the bustling crowd and intentionally inserted herself directly into our tight circle. It was Camilla. I recognized her immediately from the extensive background dossiers my corporate security team had compiled over the past few months. She was a high-powered defense lobbyist known for her aggressive and highly unethical tactics. More importantly, she was the woman my husband had been having a secret affair with for over a year. She was wearing an incredibly flashy red designer gown that plunged dramatically at the neckline. Camilla slinked right up to my husband and intimately linked her bare arm through his right arm, pressing her body against his tuxedo in a display of profound and deliberate disrespect. Bradley immediately softened his aggressive posture. The furious grip he had on my shoulder released instantly. He turned his attention entirely to his mistress, and his face transformed into a sickening mask of sheer devotion. Camilla finally turned her attention to me. She looked me up and down with a slow, exaggerated motion, ensuring her blatant disgust was visible to everyone standing nearby. "Is this the dowdy little wife you told me about, Bradley?" She sneered, her voice dripping with venom. She did not bother to lower her volume. "You really should send her home immediately," Camilla continued, leaning her head affectionately against his shoulder. "She is completely out of her depth in a room like this. We have a massive defense contract to steal tonight, Bradley. We are going to rip a billion-dollar project right out from under the nose of some secretive ghost CEO, and you simply cannot afford to have this kind of pathetic social liability dragging you down." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. She was standing in a secure federal building, openly bragging about committing corporate espionage to steal military defense contracts. She threw her head back and laughed, feeling utterly triumphant. She was completely blind to her actual surroundings. Camilla had absolutely no idea that she was staring directly into the eyes of the very ghost CEO she was actively planning to rob. I did not yell or cause a scene. I simply let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face as I prepared to utterly dismantle the lives of the two arrogant fools standing in front of me. We were standing at the security checkpoint of a White House gala when my husband grabbed my arm. "Keep your mouth shut about your boring computer job and do not embarrass me," he hissed. I did not argue. I simply handed the Secret Service agent my digital clearance. The scanner flashed a vibrant green alert. The agent stopped breathing. He stepped back and tapped the shoulder of a highly decorated Three Star Admiral. The Admiral turned locked eyes with me and snapped a flawless salute. "Colonel, we have been waiting for you," he announced. "The Joint Chiefs are inside." My husband stared at me in pure horror. "My name is Diana, and I am 34 years old. For 6 years I played the role of the quiet and docile wife to Bradley. He was a 36-year-old political public relations consultant who built his entire identity on designer suits and networking events. To him and his wealthy family, I was just a low-level IT worker who stayed home in sweatpants. His mother, Patricia, constantly reminded me that I lacked the elegance required for their high society circles. His sister, Felicity, endlessly bragged about her own accomplishments while treating me like a financial burden. I let them believe whatever made them feel superior. I never told them my boring computer job was actually my role as the sole founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber Defense. I also never mentioned I was an active reserve colonel in United States Cyber Command. Keeping my life classified protected my country and gave me the perfect vantage point to observe exactly who my husband truly was. The East Wing security checkpoint was swarming with Washington elites. Bradley adjusted his custom tuxedo and looked at my simple black evening gown with blatant disgust. He handed his gold-embossed invitation to the lead agent and waved his hand vaguely in my direction. "She is my +1, he said loudly, ensuring the people behind us heard him. "Try not to embarrass me tonight, Diana." I stepped forward and held up my phone. The agent scanned my encrypted code. The machine immediately triggered a priority alert. The agent straightened his posture and alerted the Admiral. When the Admiral saluted me and called me Colonel, the entire security line fell dead silent. Bradley blinked rapidly. His smug smile vanished. "What is going on?" he demanded, looking from the Admiral to me. Before Bradley could demand answers, an elite security detail surrounded me. They ushered me through the velvet ropes toward the VIP entrance. Bradley attempted to follow me, but a Secret Service agent placed a firm hand on his chest. "General admission must wait in the standard line," the agent stated flatly. As my heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the historic gilded halls, my encrypted Department of Defense mobile device began to vibrate violently. It was a continuous, rhythmic buzzing that I knew immediately was Bradley. I pulled the device free and glanced at the screen. The notifications were a barrage of furious, entitled text messages. "Who exactly did you sleep with to get VIP access?" read the first message. "You are humiliating me in front of my colleagues. Get back here right now and explain yourself." I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my bag. His vitriol was entirely predictable. For the 6 years of our marriage, Bradley had operated under the delusion that he was the undisputed star of our household. He thought I was weak. He thought I was poor. He paraded his political job as if he were personally running the country, demanding I iron his shirts and pack his briefcases while I was secretly managing global cyber threat deployments. The disparity between his inflated ego and his actual substance was staggering. The grand ballroom of the White House was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a sea of military dress uniforms and high-fashion evening wear. I accepted a glass of sparkling water and made my way toward the back of the room, seeking out the specific defense officials I had come to brief. I found 2 generals standing near a towering floral arrangement. They greeted me with warm handshakes and immediate respect, launching into a quiet, intense discussion about securing the new national defense grid from foreign intrusion. I was in the middle of breaking down a complex firewall architecture when I felt a sudden aggressive grip on my left shoulder. I turned sharply. Bradley stood there, his chest heaving with exertion and fury. He had finally managed to bypass the agonizingly long security line by dropping the name of a corrupt senator he consulted for. His face was twisted in a mixture of anger and arrogant disbelief. He was completely blinded by his own ego, entirely incapable of reading the room or recognizing the heavy stars glittering on the uniforms of the men standing beside me. He tightened his grip on my shoulder, his fingers digging uncomfortably into my skin. He deliberately interrupted the generals mid-sentence, treating them as if they were insignificant obstacles in his path. "What kind of stunt are you pulling here, Diana?" he hissed, his voice a harsh, demanding whisper. "Go fetch me a drink right now." I need to do some real networking tonight, and you are standing in my way. Make yourself useful for once. I looked down at the hand gripping my shoulder, then up at his furious, entitled face. I was about to calmly explain the reality of his situation when a wave of heavy floral perfume washed over us. A woman stepped out from the bustling crowd and intentionally inserted herself directly into our tight circle. It was Camilla. I recognized her immediately from the extensive background dossiers my corporate security team had compiled over the past few months. She was a high-powered defense lobbyist known for her aggressive and highly unethical tactics. More importantly, she was the woman my husband had been having a secret affair with for over a year. She was wearing an incredibly flashy red designer gown that plunged dramatically at the neckline. Camilla slinked right up to my husband and intimately linked her bare arm through his right arm, pressing her body against his tuxedo in a display of profound and deliberate disrespect. Bradley immediately softened his aggressive posture. The furious grip he had on my shoulder released instantly. He turned his attention entirely to his mistress, and his face transformed into a sickening mask of sheer devotion. Camilla finally turned her attention to me. She looked me up and down with a slow, exaggerated motion, ensuring her blatant disgust was visible to everyone standing nearby. "Is this the dowdy little wife you told me about, Bradley?" She sneered, her voice dripping with venom. She did not bother to lower her volume. "You really should send her home immediately," Camilla continued, leaning her head affectionately against his shoulder. "She is completely out of her depth in a room like this. We have a massive defense contract to steal tonight, Bradley. We are going to rip a billion-dollar project right out from under the nose of some secretive ghost CEO, and you simply cannot afford to have this kind of pathetic social liability dragging you down." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. She was standing in a secure federal building, openly bragging about committing corporate espionage to steal military defense contracts. She threw her head back and laughed, feeling utterly triumphant. She was completely blind to her actual surroundings. Camilla had absolutely no idea that she was staring directly into the eyes of the very ghost CEO she was actively planning to rob. I did not yell or cause a scene. I simply let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face as I prepared to utterly dismantle the lives of the two arrogant fools standing in front of me. The stunned silence in the courtroom was absolute. Beatrice stood completely frozen in the second row of the gallery. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her heavily applied makeup looking absurd and clownish against her pale skin. She stared at me, unable to comprehend the massive, catastrophic error she had just made. She genuinely believed she had orchestrated a brilliant financial maneuver to destroy my life. She thought she had secretly mortgaged my home to a faceless private lending bank. She had no idea that she had walked directly into a massive corporate trap that I had meticulously designed. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. My lead attorney nodded and signaled to a junior associate sitting at the end of our table. The young lawyer stood up, picked up a thick manila envelope, and walked calmly toward the gallery. He stopped directly in front of my former mother-in-law. Beatrice looked down at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her hands were shaking violently as the lawyer extended the document toward her. "You committed massive documented bank fraud, Beatrice," I explained, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "You knowingly forged my signature and used Carter's revoked power of attorney to secure a fraudulent $3 million loan. You used your own luxury estate as collateral to secure those funds. Because you lied on federal financial documents, you triggered an immediate default clause. That envelope contains a formal notice of immediate foreclosure on your property. You no longer own your home." Beatrice let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp. She snatched the envelope and ripped it open, pulling out the legal documents. Her eyes darted frantically across the pages, reading the official foreclosure notices and the asset seizure warrants. Her knees buckled under the crushing weight of her own arrogance. She collapsed back into the wooden gallery bench, hyperventilating as the reality of her total financial ruin crashed down upon her. Brittany sat beside her, completely paralyzed with terror. Judge Davis looked at Beatrice with profound disgust. She struck her wooden gavel one final time, dismissing the civil session, and transferring the entire matter to the federal criminal courts. The swift and brutal justice that followed was a masterclass in accountability. There were no lengthy appeals or miraculous legal loopholes for Carter. The federal prosecutors used the irrefutable digital evidence provided by my Cyber Command unit to secure a rock-solid conviction. 2 months later, Carter stood before a federal judge wearing his orange jumpsuit. He cried and begged for leniency, but the judge showed absolutely no mercy. Carter was officially sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. His crimes of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and attempting to breach a secure military facility guaranteed he would spend the best years of his life behind bars. Camilla faced her own devastating reckoning. The Defense Lobbying Board permanently revoked her license, ensuring she could never work in Washington again. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy and theft of classified government property. They had tried to steal an empire and they lost everything. The ruin of my enablers was equally absolute and deeply satisfying. Beatrice and Brittany could not escape the consequences of their profound greed and malicious actions. The local authorities moved swiftly on the undeniable evidence of Brittany's massive charity embezzlement. She was arrested at her luxury apartment and publicly walked out of her building in handcuffs. She faced severe felony theft charges and was ordered to pay full restitution to the children's charity she had ruthlessly robbed. Beatrice fared no better. The subsidiary bank owned by Aegis Cyber Defense executed the foreclosure on her sprawling estate with ruthless efficiency. Federal marshals arrived at her home and gave her exactly 2 hours to vacate the premises. They seized her expensive cars, her frozen bank accounts, and her valuable jewelry to cover the fraudulent loan she had attempted to take against my property. She was stripped of every single luxury she had ever owned. The social exile was instantaneous and utterly brutal. The wealthy Washington elites who used to attend Beatrice's lavish dinner parties completely abandoned her. No one would take her calls. No one offered to help. They treated her like an infectious disease. The high society circles she worshipped completely erased her from their world. She and Brittany were left entirely destitute, with absolutely nowhere to turn. With zero financial resources and their reputations permanently destroyed, they were forced to move into a tiny run-down apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood far outside the city limits. The glamorous lifestyle they had weaponized against me was completely gone. They had to learn how to survive in the exact kind of poverty they used to mock. There were no more designer dresses or expensive vintage wines. They were reduced to taking public transportation and working minimum wage jobs just to afford basic groceries and cheap rent. I sat in my secure home office looking at the final legal briefings regarding their asset seizures. I felt no guilt and no remorse. I had not destroyed their lives. I simply held up a mirror and allowed their own toxic actions to reflect back upon them. They had built their entire existence on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and profound cruelty. When that foundation finally crumbled under the weight of the truth, they had absolutely nothing left to stand on. The intensely toxic chapter of my life involving Carter and his deeply arrogant family was officially closed forever. The crushing heavy weight of their constant, endless manipulation was finally lifted from my tired shoulders. They had vastly underestimated my resilience and my profound strategic patience. I was finally completely free to focus entirely on my military career, my thriving business, and my own bright, limitless future. I had won absolutely everything today.